Janet Silver. The Prime Minister and his cabinet have wrapped up their meetings in Charlottetown. This is the first for the new cabinet following the cabinet shuffle last month. So what is top of mind for the government, and how might this impact sectors like energy, health, and agriculture? Joining me are some of my colleagues here at Syntax Strategic who have firsthand experience in both politics and the media and working in these sectors for some. Jake Enwright, Jon Dugal, Marjolaine Provost, and Lindsay Campbell. And Jon, I'm going to start with you because you've had a very close-up view of the cabinet meetings the last couple of days. What are some of the priorities that the government has laid out moving forward in the next couple of months?
Well, it's nice to see the government back in the birthplace of Confederation. I'll get that out of the way right now. The sun was shining for them, so it's a great time for them to be here. But the Prime Minister made it very clear this morning, the two priorities for the federal cabinet going into this legislative session, but also going into the final push of the current government's mandate, is going to be priority number one, housing. Priority number two, affordability, especially as it relates to young people. The Prime Minister made pains to go out of his way to communicate directly to young Canadians, particularly young adults, that they had 2 years effectively robbed of them in their development and setting themselves up for success in the future due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Prime Minister and the team understand this, so they are going to make sure that whatever the government does over the coming year, maybe 2 years, is going to be tailor-made to ensure that they have access to things like affordable homes, or to be able to afford their first home if they are looking to buy and not rent, or to make sure that they have good, stable jobs and a good, clean environment to be able to move forward with in the future. So those are really his two primary focuses going into the next session.
Jake, I just want to pick up on that. So Jon said affordability, priority number one. What about this is something that the Conservatives have been talking about for months now. Pierre Poilievre has been standing up in the House of Commons and going on about affordability. So how do you see this issue playing out in terms of the opposition? And can they count on the Prime Minister talking about this today as kind of a win for what they've been talking about?
I don't know if they count it as a win necessarily, but what they're going to do is move from a mentality of less about offense to defense. The opposition already owns the issue of affordability. They're trusted on economic and fiscal issues more than the Prime Minister is right now. They specifically have flipped the millennial vote, which has shocked a lot of pollsters, which is why the Prime Minister is talking about millennials and specifically targeting his affordability message at that demographic in the hopes of stopping the support leaking to the Conservative Party. I wonder if the Prime Minister now talking about affordability has more to do with saving the furniture at this point and making sure that his party isn't obliterated in the next election, as opposed to trying and holding on to government at this point.
So if we move away, and that's an interesting point that you make, Jake, the other thing that the Prime Minister and his cabinet have talked about a lot in the last couple of days, and one of them at the forefront has been the Health Minister, Mark Holland. In addition to affordability issues, Mark Holland said last week, and Marjo, you were there, that pharmacare legislation is something that they will introduce this fall. I'm wondering, for the health sector, because you're pretty plugged into that health sector, what are some of the things that they are expecting and looking for this fall from the government?
So the minister did say that his priorities would be rolling out the next phase of dental care, which launched last year, but only to a specific tranche of the population. I believe now the next phase is going to reach something like 9 million Canadians, which is a pretty big number. And then pharmacare, I think pharmacare ties into the whole affordability issue, right? Because you want Canadians to be able to be healthy and not go broke because they need certain medications or treatment. I think the sector really wants to see the government help it improve efficiencies. There was a big injection of funding. The minister has committed to working with the provinces and with the sector to make sure that that funding really, is used for the purpose of improving healthcare results for Canadians altogether. So I think the sector wants to see collaboration at all levels of government, because in the end, what doctors and healthcare professionals want is to see better health outcomes for their patients.
So Lindsay, interesting what Marjo was saying in terms of affordability and healthcare. In terms of the agriculture sector, which is one that you follow pretty closely, what are you watching for in the coming months with this new cabinet?
Well, I'll be keeping tabs on Bill C-234. I know that the producers were pretty disappointed to not see that pass in the Senate. That got held up right at the last minute before parliamentarians left for the summer. But essentially, this is a bill that aims to provide an exemption on the carbon tax for propane and natural gas use around grain drying and heating barns. And that would have been really important in terms of alleviating costs just with the upcoming harvest season. But I'll also be looking to see what sort of climate funding will be injected into agriculture. So this is something that the Liberal government has been very good at doing and marketing it in such a way where it will alleviate costs associated with quote unquote climate friendly farming measures. So just really incentivizing farmers in the way of innovation and technology and emission reductions as we look to reduce targets. So that's what I'll be looking for.
Jake, Lindsay just said that the Liberals were very good at doing something. I want to just go back to you though when we're talking about housing and affordability, because I'm wondering whether or not you may have a slightly different opinion on that.
Well, they are. The Liberal Party, and I think this has changed a little bit maybe in the last 8 years, but the Liberal Party has typically been the party that is most efficient in governance, and they deserve a lot of credit for what historically has been achieved by that party. But the problem they have right now is they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. Think about the two key priorities that Jon just mentioned, housing and affordability. They can't solve the housing issue if they don't resolve the immigration issue. If they don't resolve the housing issue, they're going to lose government. If they resolve the immigration issue, they're going to lose a key demographic integral to them holding on to government. They can't resolve the affordability issue unless they stop doing things like pharmacare and dental care. They don't resolve the affordability issue, they lose government. If they don't move forward on pharmacare and phase 2 dental care, they lose the NDP, who are integral to them holding on to government. So they're in a very precarious position here. They're damned if they do and damned if they don't, which, it's a hard thing to see, and I've been at the end of lifespans of government. I hope for their sake and for all my friends in the Liberal Party's sake that they are into the mode of leaving behind a strong legacy and a strong official opposition and not running out the clock here in a way that's detrimental to the long-term health of the party. I think, I personally believe that a strong Liberal Party as the main opponent to the Conservative Party of Canada is a better thing for Canada than the NDP, especially an NDP led by Jagmeet Singh.
Just to pick up on what you were saying though, Jake, Jon, we're talking about housing. At the end of the day, though, is that really a federal government's responsibility? And how much leeway do they have to alleviate that crisis? Like, what can they do?
Well, I think there's division in cabinet over that, right? We saw the Prime Minister a couple of weeks ago, or about a month ago now, suggest that federal government is not solely responsible for housing. And that is absolutely correct, especially as it relates to just the complexity of the housing issue in general. We have zoning issues which are overseen by municipalities. We have municipalities which are overseen by provincial decree and provincial acts of legislation. And then you have federal government coming in on top that can be a bit more of a national convener and use the power of the federal purse to really kind of incentivize action. So when I look at housing right now, for example, and I think Sean Fraser seems to see it very similarly, is that the federal government has an important role to play. And even the Prime Minister's comments this morning at Cabinet Retreat post-media scrum were very telling, I think, insofar as he suggested that the federal government will play that central convening role. He will convene the not-for-profit sector, the for-profit sector, the municipalities, the provinces, to get everybody on board in at least a similar direction to move things forward. But what I'm hearing as well on the ground is that it's no small piece that the housing file shifted from being a quasi-sole mandate under Ahmed Hussein to being paired under infrastructure and communities, which is now led by Sean Fraser. It's because of the policy tools that will be at the minister's disposal, both from a funding perspective and also from an incentive perspective, given the broader nature of infrastructure and communities and the work that they do with municipalities in particular. It's because of that the federal government really wanted to hone that in under that portfolio. So even when I look forward to this fall and we understand from the Prime Minister's comments earlier this summer that a new infrastructure package of some kind is going to be coming this fall. What I'm going to be looking for most is going to be, how does the federal government pair existing programs and existing funding streams to municipalities, be it through the gas tax fund or any type of infrastructure funds for public transit, etc. How does the federal government pair that and housing density and zoning times to getting money out the door or incentivizing with more money to municipalities and provinces moving forward?
Jake, I just want to pick up on one thing, though, we haven't talked about. We've talked about health, we've talked about housing, affordability, agriculture. In this, we've not talked about energy. And I want to flag this just before we switch gears for a second, because the Prime Minister was asked about that at a press conference Wednesday morning. Full disclosure, we are recording this Wednesday afternoon. So this morning in Charlottetown, he was asked about the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and he spoke about, want to have the cleanest fossil fuels and beat out competition globally. And I'm wondering if it's, with the Conservatives, not to put words in your mouth, is this kind of like wanting cake and eating it at the same time while still doing wink, wink, nod, nod here? We're really not going to eat this cake because here's plan B.
Of course it is. And I smile because I'm reminded when Ron Ambrose was interim leader to respond to the purchasing of TMX by the government, the first line out of her mouth, which was not rehearsed, was this pipeline will never be built, and the twinning of this pipeline will never be complete, more accurately. And here we are, it hasn't been built. The twinning is not yet complete. If the government was smart and wanted to increase Canada's competitiveness, then it would make some very targeted and relatively cheap, compared to some of the other money that's being spent on things like EV, investments in renewable production here in Canada. Instead, feedstock is going south of the border, Canadian feedstock south of the border, to make those renewables that are then being shipped back to Canada to be put into our fuel at retail gas stations. So that's a small investment, comparatively speaking, to the other sectors of the economy the government is propping up with corporate welfare. That could really make a difference in pushing Canada's energy sector in the right place and making it more competitive.
Just before we go, I want to switch gears slightly, and Marjo, throw this one to you, because it's been talked over the last couple of weeks. The government has come out, Anita Anand, who's now responsible procurement, is saying our Treasury Board, we have to cut $15 billion, and the deadline for departments to make those cuts is early October. That's a big number. Do you think sectors like health should be prepared for cuts?
Yeah, so I mean, machinery of government is, a very opaque box, for lack of a better word. And I don't have a crystal ball. What I do know is that I don't believe they will cut any programs or any funding that relate to supporting families, specifically children. So like, projects and programs like the Canada Child Benefit, I think those are untouchable. I would also say they've just created a minister for services to Canadians. So again, I would, put my 2 cents at, they're not going to cut programs that deliver services to Canadians. So where does that leave us? And I think also the environment is becoming such a hot topic issue that you can't conceivably think to maintain your ratings and be slashing, and clean environment initiatives or things like that. So what does that leave in terms of where do we cut? Because there will be cuts. I think maybe some regional development, maybe some business incentives, maybe playing around with some of the tax breaks for different sectors. Those are some of the things that I'm fairly certain the government will consider. Health is another issue and another portfolio where they have committed ginormous amounts of money which is needed. So again, I don't think that, they're in a position to roll that back. So my 2 cents would be more towards the business sector, maybe infrastructure in certain places where other levels of government can pick up the tab. So it's a complex exercise, and both the Treasury Board Minister and the former Minister of Health, who's the new Minister of Procurement and Services, Jean-Yves Duclos, will definitely have a tough couple of months coming ahead.
Anyway. So Lindsay, in terms of cuts to regions, and, I mentioned earlier off the top that you tend to focus more in terms of agriculture. Are you hearing anything, or have any of the people that you've been speaking to in that sector worried about potential cuts with the government's announcement?
Well, internally, I'm hearing that the implications will be not necessarily the public-facing programs, but more so on the bureaucracy side. I will be interested to see, though, where the government moves in terms of infrastructure. So I know Minister McCauley did say that he's very focused on the agricultural implications around environment and environmental challenges. Senator Rob Black put out a report last fall on the implications of BC flooding and had a number of recommendations in there. And in that report, it also said that just from that one flooding incident, $285 million was lost from the sector. So when we think about climate change and actually building infrastructure supports, we have to think about the food security implications. And so I'll be looking to see if we're moving along in that respect.
And just before we go, John, Jake, I'm going to throw you both under the bus and throw a question at you that just comes out of left field. We've gone through, we're nearly at the end of summer. Well, Parliament will return in less than a month. Looking back over the barbecue circuit, the cabinet shuffle, bit of a change up for the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, in terms of style. Just wondering, how the two of you would assess this summer's barbecue circuit, and if you will, perhaps a bit of a reset for both the government and perhaps a little bit for the Conservatives. John, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. To put it blankly, tough summer for the Liberals, tough summer for the government, but that is what's going to happen both after 8 years of being in office and having some baggage that you go through in that time in office. It doesn't get easier in terms of the baggage, it gets more difficult. But also you have this paired crisis of rising inflation and rising interest rates to combat it, which of course the governor of the Bank of Canada is an arm's length entity that isn't controlled by the federal cabinet, and nor should it be, quite frankly, as well, because that could seriously get into the case of actual political interference that we don't want to see in a democracy like Canada. So you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. However, if the indicators do turn around and if we find ourselves 12 months from now, where all of a sudden you're not dealing with inflation at the same pace that it was. In fact, if inflation comes down, and if because of that interest rates start to fall, and if the governor of the Bank of Canada starts to really reduce interest rates, I think you're going to be looking back at this year as being just another blip in the radar. If you're the Liberals heading into another election, potentially next fall or the year after, because at that point, times will be better. People will be a bit more engaged as you get a bit closer to a federal election. So I believe the tides could turn in that way. For the opposition, I'd be advising you to take advantage of the current status that the government finds itself in. When you find yourself in high inflation, when you find yourself in high interest rate territory, continue doing what Pierre Poilievre does best, and that is to wedge at the federal government and to needle the prime minister. He does have a way of getting under the prime minister's skin. There's no doubt about that. So from that perspective, continue going on. This new rebrand that they're undergoing with Pierre Poilievre, while it is a little awkward at times without the glasses, and perhaps he missed his speaking notes because he misspeaks, like at Ile du Saint-Edouard, for example, he can come back from that, and softening the tone of Pierre Poilievre and softening his image is seemingly doing good for his brand.
Jake?
For the Conservatives, boring, calm, quiet. Boring, calm, and quiet are good when you are winning. For the Liberals, it is save the furniture time. As I said, I think they're in a catch-22 when it comes to their policy priorities, but they will try to push forward some initiatives that will be legacy pieces for Justin Trudeau. And I hope that they continue to be in that save the furniture mode, because, as I said, I don't trust Jagmeet Singh as an official opposition. I don't think that's good for Canada or our democracy. But the one thing I will say is Conservatives and Canadians cannot underestimate Justin Trudeau's ability to convince people that he is the solution to their problems. He is a master at transitioning himself into something he is not. He is not the economic solution Canadians need right now, but he is very good at convincing, in a way, at telling them he is exactly what they need right now.
I gotta say, I look forward to talking to all of you in the coming months in terms of how this is all going to play out. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks to my colleagues here, Jake Enwright, Marjolaine Provost, Jon Dugal, and Lindsay Campbell. I'm Janet Silver. Till next time.